A new report from Canada's cyber spy agency is warning that Canadians are vulnerable to foreign interference in this fall's federal election. The communications security establishment says it's, quote, very likely that Canadian voters will be targeted, and of particular concern are social media disinformation campaigns designed to polarize voters and create distrust in the electoral process. The report also says foreign adversaries continue to target political parties, candidates, and their staff. So who is targeting us, and what is Ottawa doing to combat these cyber threats? Karina Gould is the Minister of Democratic Institutions, and she joins me now from the foyer of the House of Commons in the West Block. Hi, Minister Gould. Great to see you again. Thanks for your time today.
Hi, Vashi.
So the CSE judges it, as we said, quote, very likely that Canadian voters will encounter some foreign cyber interference related to the 2019 federal elections. Can you be specific about which adversaries you expect will target Canadians?
So as we've said over the past 2 years, the government and our security agencies have been looking into this. It's important to note that this report that was released today is an update to the original report that was released in June 2017 that looks at cybersecurity across the board here in Canada, particularly with regards to our democratic processes. And as I've said many times before, what we're looking at specifically is the threats and the tools that are being used to target Canadians, to target political parties, and to target our elections. And while the report names, for example, Russia, because we know that that's a very public example, it doesn't go into the specifics because, as I've said many times before, it's less important about who the actors are that are trying to interfere in our elections, but it's the very interference itself and being able to prepare, inform, and educate Canadians about what that interference could look like.
Why have you deemed it less important? Why have you deemed the who less important if, in fact, it is state-sponsored actors? Why isn't that important?
Because what the community is looking at is they're looking at the ways in which they're targeting different voters and different elements of our democratic process. And the fact is that they need to look at broadly at what all of the different threats are. And if they focus on the who, then they might miss the what and the how. And so they're taking a broad look at all of this, and Canadians can look at it publicly online. It's available through CSE's website, and it's really important, I think, for Canadians to understand how different actors, it's not just foreign states, but it could be non-state organizations and hacktivists and organized crime as well, could use cyber tools to try and influence the next election.
If knowledge is power, though, for Canadians in defending themselves, why would you keep any of that knowledge from them? Why, for example, in the United States, we know very clearly that Russia was such a prominent actor. They've been so specific about Russia being involved in this, and that helps us understand to what end Russia was involved, right? Like Russia has a skin in the game, for example, and that could be the same when it comes to Canada. So I'm just wondering if the goal is protecting ourselves, why wouldn't the government want to arm us with as much knowledge as possible?
So we are, which is exactly what's in the report. And the report talks about the very different mechanisms that are available. So spear phishing attempts, hack and leak attempts, spreading false and disinformation campaigns. And this is all really important because Canadians, as they access and live more of their lives online, it's important to be a little critical of the information that they see on social media platforms and to have an understanding.
Minister, you refuse to say where it's coming from.
So if you'll let me continue, Vashi, that it's really important to have an understanding, as we've said over the past 2 years, that often what these actors are looking for is to create chaos and to create confusion and to build a lack of trust in the democratic process itself. And so Canadians being able to identify what good and bad information is, or to have a more critical eye to it, will be really important. The other thing that we talk about in the CSE report that I think is really important is to practice good cyber hygiene. And so, if you're getting, for example, a text message or an email that has a link and you don't know exactly who the sender is, don't click on that link, because that's a key way to get into your system, to get information and to get data from you. And
we could literally be talking about dating scams right now, right? Like, we're talking about a targeting of an election in a political capacity. And that's why I'm just still confused as to why the government has deemed it unnecessary for Canadians to understand what is motivating those who are targeting us.
So I did talk about motivation just now. I talked about the fact that there is an interest to sow confusion and to create chaos and to create a lack of trust in the process. We're not ruling out attribution should something significant occur, but that's a decision that would have to be taken through the whole of government, because that will have wide-ranging consequences. But we have attributed in the past to other cyber interferences or threats or attacks, and that's something that we would take on a case-by-case basis. But for the purpose of informing Canadians right now as to what to look to, it's important for them to understand how these tools can be manipulated, how social media platforms can be used, and to really take a critical approach to the information that they consume and share online.
You said also earlier today, Minister, that you're not feeling great about where you are with respect to social media companies on this issue of foreign interference specifically. At what point will you sort of draw a line and seek a legislative solution?
So that's an excellent question, Vashi, because we've been having conversations with social media platforms about, cleaning up their act and ensuring that our next elections are protected. And while those conversations are ongoing, I haven't felt that they've been taken as seriously here in Canada as they have perhaps in other places around the world. And I think we're getting to a point where we need to seriously be looking at what a regulatory approach would be here in Canada. And those are the conversations that we need to be having as a society. What are the things that we want to see, and how do we enforce those? One of the things that I think is really important is that whatever framework we end up creating has to be forward-looking, because the technology changes so rapidly that we don't want to put something in place that deals with yesterday's problem, but also looks to the future. And so those are the conversations that we're having internally right now.
When you say regulatory approach, do you mean the government is considering legislation?
We're looking at all options right now, and we're looking at, what allies and partners around the world are doing. So you're probably aware that the UK today put out a white paper. Germany has specific laws with regards to hate speech. Australia has put forward legislation that would hold social media executives accountable for violent activity or incitement of violent activity on their platforms. We're looking at what everyone is doing around the world and trying to figure out where the gaps are here in Canada and what we would need to do to address those gaps and to move forward.
It's also especially significant, of course, given the election, the upcoming election. And I'm wondering if timing could be an issue, though. If you do decide to pursue some kind of legislative solution, there's only about 8 sitting weeks left in the calendar. Is it even possible to bring in some kind of new regulatory approach or legislative framework for these social media companies prior to the election?
Well, so one thing that I would say is that we have, in fact, legislated the social media companies previously through Bill C-76, our Elections Modernization Act, when it came to online political advertisements and having a registry, not knowingly accepting any foreign funding for political advertisements and ensuring there are taglines on any of those political advertisements, in addition to new requirements for third parties, both during the pre-writ and the writ period. So we have, things that we've acted on the short term, and then there's the medium term and the long term. And of course, whoever is in government moving forward, we can lay the groundwork for them to be able to pick up where we left off in the near term. And I think this is something that, as Canadians look more closely into how we learn social media companies operate, how they use our data, it's going to be something that we absolutely need to turn our attention to, and that's what we're working on right now.
Just quickly, I want to be sure, does that mean that there's no new legislation? We shouldn't expect new legislation from your government on this particular issue with social media companies this sitting?
So I'm going to leave all options on the table right now, and that's something that we're discussing at the moment, and we're going to look for a way to be forward-looking and to ensure that we're providing all options for Canadians.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Minister Gould. That's Democratic Institutions Minister Karina Gould from the foyer of the House of Commons. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.